Hey, 7th grade. I hope everything's going pretty good. I'm going to walk you through the next couple steps for your everyday tools and objects drawing. You should have already seen the video for the colored pencil techniques, so hopefully you've already done that. And when you're ready to move on to the next part, what we're going to do is we're going to take those techniques and you're going to apply them to the drawing that you made last week that should still be in your sketchbook. Now, I am going to show you again the examples that are in the Google Slides presentation. Make sure you look at those because they're going to give you an idea of how we're applying color. It's going to be a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this over so you can see my example. Now, here is my example from my everyday tools and objects drawing. We all did different ones, which is perfectly fine. That's a good thing. The first step is you're going to have to grid your drawing, and you're going to do this with a ruler and a pencil. Okay, it's very important that you do this with a pencil as opposed to a pen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up, and your sketchbook should be 9 by 12. So every 2 inches, I'm going to make a little mark at the top. So 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. All right, so every 2 inches, and I'm going to do that at the top and at the bottom. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And now I'm going to take my straight edge and I'm going to connect those because if I measured correctly, they should be fairly straight. And you want to do this very lightly with your pencil. I'm going to try to press a little bit harder so you can see it better on the camera. But again, this part should be done with the pencil because you are not going to outline it. We are done with ink for the rest of this lesson. The rest of it is going to be with colored pencil. So I'm going to take a little bit of time right here. I'm going to do each one nice and straight. And again, this is every 2 inches. And there's my first set of lines. Now, what I'm going to do next is, I'm actually going to turn it this way so it's a little bit easier. I'm going to be doing lines going the opposite way. Now, our sketchbooks are 9 by 12s, so this is an odd number right here. What I'm going to do is for this, I'm actually going to go every 3 inches, so we're actually going to be working within rectangles as opposed to squares. So I'm going to go 3 and 6. The same thing down here. Make a mark at 3 and again at 6. I'm going to take my ruler, line it up. And again, remember to do this very lightly so it doesn't actually bleed through with your colored pencils. Now, I have my grid. Now, what I am going to do is this. I'm going to take the colored pencil techniques that you should have practiced. I'm going to take these and apply them to this drawing. Now, you kind of have to pick and choose which direction you're going to go in. This is where you have to use your own kind of artistic choices and decision making. Now, what you're doing is you're doing each one of these squares at a time. So each one at a time. And you can actually use different colors for each one. So this makes a little bit of an optical illusion to where the person will see the object but vary in colors. So for example, you don't even have to go in order, so you don't have to start here and go all the way across. So for example, if I wanted to start in this rectangle and I decide to use directional lines, I'm going to grab the colored pencils I need. And I'm going to go ahead and start. And I'm going to apply that technique to one area of my drawing. So again, this would be the directional strokes. Now, if I wanted to, I could do an entire square or an entire rectangle of just one technique if I wanted to. Or if I wanted to, I could also mix things up a little bit. I can go ahead and go in with another color and use burnishing. So the one where I build my layers gradually. So that way there's a really good layer of pigment. you are not going for realistic colors within your drawing. You can replace those colors. So for example, these are my AirPods. My AirPods are white, of course. But for this, we are actually breaking those little rules of color and being realistic. So for my burnishing, I'm going to go ahead and do another layer. Now, that's the positive space right there. So for example, this negative space has to be colored in as well. And again, I can use a different technique if I wanted to. Or I can use one of the ones I've already done. But for the negative space, I'm actually thinking cross-hatching would be a great technique to use in negative space. So that way it is filled in. Now, as you go, I would suggest erasing these pencil lines. So that way you don't have them there. And also, I forgot to mention this before with cross-hatching, you can actually use the same color within cross-hatching. So you don't necessarily have to switch up the colors if you don't want to. But I will be doing that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and finish up this rectangle, and then I'm going to explain how you would move forward within the whole thing, because you will have to apply color to the entire drawing. So, almost forgot part of the crayon. So let's say I want to do burnishing here real quick, where I build up those waxy layers of colors. So oddly enough, a little tidbit of information, colored pencils are actually made with wax, very similar to crayons, which means they can be layered pretty easily, and they put down different amounts of pigment, so different amounts of color. So this is going to be a lighter amount, but I can always press down firmer and get more pigment, which is what allows you to get lights and darks. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this rectangle. So for example, this section is now done. I can move on to the next one. Now, if you want, you don't need to even move in order. Like I said, you don't have to start in square one. You can move to the next one. But as you see, this entire rectangle is finished. So if I would like to make sure my drawing stays nice and clean, I can go ahead and gently take an eraser to the edges, so I keep the graphite kind of off my drawing. So let's say now I wanted to move down to this one, if I wanted to go in a different order. I can use any of the techniques that were laid out here. Now, there was one thing I wanted to mention. These two techniques, blending with oil and watercolor, if you don't have these materials, these are not required, okay? Now, you are required a minimum number of techniques, but if, say, you don't have these, you just don't worry about them, not a big deal. So I could move on to, say, the next one, and if, say, I wanted to do scumbling, where I do layers of repetitive color in that kind of scribbled motion. I call it controlled scribbles, so we're not actually scribbling. And then, again, I can keep going from there. And remember what I said, we're not going for realistic colors. You can replace those. So if you want, some people like to look at their colored pencils. So if I pulled them all out at once, and they would pick a handful of colors. So they would pick maybe like 9 or 12 different colors and actually stick with this theme. Or you can just use them all. It's completely up to you. But some people will use kind of a theme set of colors. And if you want to do that, that is fine as well. That color choice is completely up to you. So what I would do is I would keep working within this square. So different techniques each time, or I can just stick with one technique in each rectangle even. Either way would be fine. So if, say, I wanted to do cross-hatching, again for the negative space, that would just be my preference. You wouldn't necessarily have to. If you wanted to, you could do burnishing in the negative space if you didn't have very much of it. Or if you wanted to, you could use watercolor and layer over the watercolor if you happen to have that. It's up to you how you execute the techniques, but you will be assessed on how effective you are in them. That meaning how cleanly and your attention to detail with the techniques. So sloppier work, of course, not so much. So I would keep working from there. And of course, again, you can just erase your colored pencils as you go. Now, this process is going to take a little while. This would not be a finished piece. Again, it has to be your entire sketchbook page, so this might take you a little bit longer than, say, last week's. So be sure you give yourself plenty of time to finish this. I wouldn't recommend doing it the night before, but I will be checking in with you guys on Wednesday. So if you're watching this ahead of time, I will see you in a little while. Again, if you have any questions, remember to email me so that way I can get to them, or if you need to, use the comments in our Google Classroom, okay? All right, guys, have a good week.